The cameras were rolling, the lights were hot, and the air inside the studio was already thick with that electric tension that only live television can summon. Kash Patel leaned forward in his chair, lips curling into a smirk that seemed rehearsed 1,000 times in the mirror. With casual arrogance, he lobbed a barbed remark, the kind crafted to sting and entertain, meant to remind the audience that he was in control of the stage. The crowd reacted. Nervous chuckles, scattered, applause, the kind of uneasy laughter born less from amusement and more from shock. Did he really just say that? Patel basked in it, shoulders squared, utterly convinced the night was his to dominate. But across from him sat Rep. Jasmine Crockett. She didn't flinch. She didn't frown. She didn't even blink. Instead, she fixed Patel with the kind of stare that swallowed the laughter whole. It was measured, poised, steady as steel. In that silence, tension bled through the room. A silence so sharp you could hear the shuffling of papers, the faint hum of the cameras. And then, it happened. Crockett leaned in ever so slightly. Her voice calm, deliberate, every word sharpened into a blade. In less than 30 seconds, Patel's smugness shattered like glass underfoot. The audience gasped, some even clapping mid-sentence as the comeback reverberated beyond the walls of that studio. On that night, a new political legend was written in real time. And yet, that was just the beginning of what would become a political spectacle for the ages. The clash wasn't just about two people trading sharp lines on a TV set. It was bigger, much bigger. In that brief, charged moment, the confrontation crystallized something deeper about where America finds itself. Caught between two forces, one defined by arrogance and manipulation, and the other bolstered by clarity, resilience, and the hunger for honest truth. Kash Patel's performance thrived on swagger. He represented a familiar archetype in the political arena, the operator who mistakes cleverness for wisdom, sound bites for substance, and hostility for strength. For years, this formula had worked. Theatrics often grab headlines. Manufactured, outrage travels faster than integrity on social media. But the nation has grown weary of constant noise. The bluff and bluster may excite partisans, but to everyday viewers it feels like nails on a chalkboard, a hollow echo when people are desperate for something real. And then there was Jasmine Crockett. In her deliberate silence before her retort, she carried an entire counter-philosophy without saying a word. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to over-gesture, didn't even need to meet arrogance with equal volume. Instead, she stood as the personification of grounded service, sharp intelligence shaped by lived experience, dignity honed through years in public life, poise carved from battles that never made it to television screens. That stark contrast tapped into the wider frustration simmering across the country. Viewers watching didn't just register a clever line, they recognized a rare flicker of authenticity, an antidote to the exhaustion of politics performed like reality TV. If ever, a moment was needed for one voice to slice cleanly through noise, exposing the hollowness of empty posturing. It was this one, and Crockett seized it. But to understand why Crockett's words carried such weight, we must peel back the mask of the man who thought he could rattle her. Every drama needs its antagonist, and Kash Patel steps into that role like a man born for it. On stage, his smirk wasn't just an expression. It was a trademark, the calling card of someone who had learned long ago that swagger could fill the gaps where substance fell short. His confidence wasn't subtle. It was theatrical, bordering on cartoonish. And, like all villains who confuse volume with vision, he believed the stage lights would always bend in his favor. Patel's story began with ambition that burned hot and fast. As a lawyer and later a government official, he climbed quickly through the ranks of political machinery, finding opportunity in proximity to power. He wasn't the kind to labor in shadows for decades, accumulating quiet wisdom. Instead, his rise was marked by quick affiliations, strategic loyalty, and a knack for knowing exactly which doors to knock on to get ahead. In short, he made politics his stage, not his service. But there's a pattern with men like Patel. Sure, ambition propels them upward, but arrogance corrodes the foundation. In roles where stewardship mattered, Patel became known less for solving problems than for crafting headlines. His style thrived on controversy, conjuring sound bites that could dominate a news cycle, even if substance fell thin. And while supporters lauded him as bold, critics saw him as reckless, a man more interested in performance than policy. Contradictions trailed him at every turn. Patel boasted of being a truth-teller, yet he was often accused of parroting talking points designed to shield the very corridors of power he claimed to question. He styled himself as fearless, yet resorted again and again to cheap taunts, mocking those who disagreed with him rather than engaging them with reason. It was a brand built on deflection dressed up as dominance, a facade that thrived until it met someone unwilling to play by those rules. Overconfidence became his Achilles heel. The more he mistook stagecraft for strength, the more convinced he became that opponents would crumble under pressure. Debate, for him, wasn't dialogue, it was conquest. His strategy relied on rattling people, throwing enough noise into the air that his adversary would stumble, giving him the chance to gloat. And perhaps, up until that night, it worked often enough to reaffirm his belief in his own performance. Audiences gave him polite applause, headlines spun his bluster into buzz, and he leaned further into the act. He believed he could dismiss, interrupt, and out-talk anyone who dared stand across from him. Which is why the universe has a wicked sense of humor, because just across the stage sat someone who was forged in fire, not flattery. Heroes rarely announce themselves with fanfare. They're shaped quietly, in the undercurrents of life, often in places that don't make the evening news. Jasmine Crockett did not step into politics with a silver spoon or a ready-made entourage. Her path was harder, cut through obstacles. That would have sent others searching for the nearest exit ramp. And because of those struggles, she walked into the spotlight with something Kash Patel never had: the weight of lived experience and the armor of unshakable authenticity. Born into a world where expectations whispered small dreams, Crockett refused to listen. She defied the scripts written for her, scripts that told her to settle, to shrink, to stay silent. She pursued education with relentless focus, facing the doubts that trail women of color in professional spaces like shadows. And rather than bending under them, she turned them into fuel. Where others saw gates, she saw challenges to be kicked open. Her career as a lawyer laid the foundation for her legend. She wasn't the kind of attorney who chased flashy cases for headlines. Instead, she fought for the overlooked and underserved, those whose names would never grace the newspapers but whose lives hung in the balance of a system too often stacked against them. In courtrooms, she didn't just argue law, she embodied justice. Each trial, each defense, each uphill battle against systemic inequities became training for something larger, a preparation for the national stage. When she transitioned into politics, she carried with her the grit of the grassroots. Crockett didn't arrive in Congress as a polished insider rehearsing talking points. She came armed with authenticity. She leaned into her role not as a performer, but as someone who understood how much truth matters when power prefers distortion. Her style was fearless, sharp, unyielding, qualities that drew instant respect from allies and sharp rebukes from detractors who suddenly realized she couldn't be underestimated, let alone silenced. Crockett's rise wasn't a straight line to glory. It was a climb through storms. She encountered prejudice, institutional resistance, and the endless derision hurled at women who won't play small. Yet, through each challenge she doubled down on her core values: service over showmanship, truth over theatrics, grit over glamour. She embodied the rare combination of accessibility and strength. Someone who could share a laugh with constituents at a local community event and, in the next breath, dismantle a bad faith opponent on live television with surgical precision, and That's what made her magnetic. She was both relatable and formidable. For everyday Americans weary of spectacles without substance, she offered something refreshing. Proof that you could rise, you could fight, and you could do it without selling your soul to cynicism or corruption. In her, people saw their own frustrations articulated, but they also saw possibility, a reminder that dignity can win battles in a noisy world. She walked onto that studio stage not as a politician eager for applause, but as a woman who had faced real fights and carried the scars as evidence of her resilience. She didn't need to speak first to dominate the space. Her presence was enough. So when Patel thought he was speaking to just another politician, the truth was he was staring at a storm he couldn't see coming. At first, Patel thought he was cruising. The smirk was firmly in place, his voice pitched to dominate the room, and every new barb rolled off his tongue like a rehearsed monologue. He gestured broadly, palms slicing the air, tossing out taunts, meant to needle, to provoke, to rattle Jasmine Crockett into reacting. But the studio audience wasn't responding as predictably as he expected. The first laugh felt forced. The second chuckle fractured into uncomfortable silence. Some leaned forward uneasily in their seats. The equilibrium had shifted. Beneath the lights, it wasn't Patel commanding the space. It was the tension itself. Everyone sensed it. His performance was starting to overstay its welcome. And there sat Crockett, still as a stone under pressure. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flail. She let the noise wash around her, steady as an oak in a storm. Every second she refused to take his bait, the imbalance grew more obvious. Theatrics on one side, discipline on the other. Patel tried. Harder. His voice rose, his insults sharpened, repeating themselves as though volume alone would conjure victory. The words tumbled into one another, increasingly frantic, increasingly hollow. For all his showmanship, the cracks in his veneer had begun to show. The audience felt it too, the growing discomfort of watching a man corner himself with overconfidence. Eyes darted between them like a tennis match seconds before the serve. The air grew heavy. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, hungry for the collision everyone knew was now inevitable. Crockett's silence was its own statement, a refusal to dignify bluster with panic. She didn't need a script. She didn't need theatrics. Her composure spoke louder than any insult volleyed her way. And then, just when it seemed the tirade might drown the room, Crockett leaned forward. For what felt like an eternity, Patel continued planting flags in his crumbling kingdom of bluster, each line landing with diminishing return. He mistook Crockett's silence for weakness, mistook her stillness for surrender. To him, dominating airtime meant dominating the moment, and so he pushed harder, louder, piling bravado on top of bravado, confident there would be no reckoning. But, all the while, Crockett waited. Patient, precise, letting him script his own undoing. Every burst of arrogance, every recycled insult, only built suspense that Patel couldn't sense, but everyone else could. The audience's eyes weren't really on him anymore. They were watching her, waiting, knowing instinctively that something was coming. The calm before the storm. Then it happened. Crockett leaned into her microphone, eyes fixed steady on Patel. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't match his theatrics. Instead, she delivered her retort like a scalpel. Precise, sharp, impossible to ignore. Within a heartbeat, the dynamic inverted. Her words cut through his monologue with the clarity of a bell tolling in the dead of night. Gasps filled the room. A few chuckles broke free, quickly swelling into applause. Someone in the back audibly whispered, "Oh my God!" as the crowd erupted, not in forced laughter this time, but in spontaneous release. Patel's smirk faltered. The hand gestures froze mid-air. All his practiced swagger dissolved in real time, leaving only the thin outline of a man who had finally been unmasked. This was no longer a battle of theatrics. It was a public demonstration of what strength looks like when it doesn't need to shout. Patel, who thrived on spectacle, suddenly looked brittle, cornered by the very stage he thought was his weapon. Crockett, steady and unshaken, had turned the tables with a single devastating strike. In that instant, the narrative flipped entirely. The villain who mistook noise for power was exposed as fragile. The hero, calm and collected, revealed her true force, the kind of strength that doesn't need to thunder to shake the earth beneath her opponent. The silence after the applause was louder than Patel's entire rant. And in that silence, one truth hung heavy. The room now belonged to Jasmine Crockett. But the fireworks didn't end on that stage, because within minutes the outside world picked up the signal. The sound of applause in the studio was only the first tremor. The real earthquake came when the clip hit the internet. Within minutes, highlight reels began circulating. Edited, slowed down, zoomed in on Patel's faltering smirk and Crockett's razor-clean delivery. What had started as a live TV spat was mutating, evolving, becoming something else entirely, a cultural event. Hashtags bloomed across Twitter like wildfire. Ask Crockett mic drop, Itu's truth over bluster, Kash Patel owned. TikTok creators synced her comeback. Over music, looping it with dramatic captions and reaction shots stitched in from viewers around the country. Memes exploded across Instagram. Side-by-side comparisons of Patel's smug grin before and the slack-jawed silence after. Even late-night comedians seized it, replaying the moment with the kind of glee reserved for instant classics. But beyond the jokes, there was reverence. Comment sections filled with stories from teachers, nurses, community organizers, people, in living rooms nationwide typing out the same sentiment. Finally, someone said what we've all been feeling. Crockett's words became shorthand, a rallying cry not just for those who admired her politics but for anyone weary of arrogance pretending to be authority. In a media landscape so often dominated by noise, the clarity of her retort cut through like lightning in the night sky. The clip wasn't just watched, it was shared, celebrated, and repeated until it became something larger than a debate moment. It was fuel for everyone exhausted by the spectacle, proof that truth delivered calmly can still overpower the loudest. Deception. Patel, once convinced he'd scripted his own headline, now found himself dwarfed by Crockett's shadow. Each trending post became a mirror reflecting how completely he'd been upstaged. Meanwhile, Crockett was elevated, not merely as a sharp debater, but as a cultural symbol, fearless, authentic, unbending in the face of hubris. People weren't just watching history happen, they were participating in it, amplifying it, making it immortal one share at a time. The courtroom of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and the echoes were deafening. But in the roar of retweets and headlines, something deeper emerged, a lesson etched into history. The thunder of applause may fade, the hashtags may cycle out for the next trending moment, but what lingered long after Jasmine Crockett's mic drop was something deeper than digital fanfare. It became the parable of a time when dignity squared off against arrogance, and dignity won. Think about the contrast. Patel strutted into that studio believing volume was the same as strength, that a sharp insult was equal to truth. He thought grandeur in delivery would disguise hollowness in substance. But Crockett reminded us of something timeless. Grace isn't passive, it's powerful. Her calm focus outlasted his theatrics. Her clarity cut sharper than his bluster, and her humanity rang louder than his condescension. It was more than a debate moment. It was proof that in a political climate saturated with noise, stillness itself can be revolutionary. Crockett showed that courage doesn't always wear armor or shout from the rooftops. Sometimes it wears a measured smile, waits quietly, and delivers its strike when arrogance has finally run out of steam. That is why the clip traveled so far. People didn't just laugh at Patel's collapse, They celebrated the reminder that truth still matters, that poise still triumphs over provocation, that character still carries weight in a world addicted to spectacle. For once, the hero wasn't the loudest voice in the room. She was the clearest. This is the power of restraint, of sharpened intellect, of carrying oneself with dignity even when baited. Crockett's moment speaks not only to politics but to everyday struggles. We all face our Patels, people who mistake intimidation for authority. And her example whispers to us, you don't have to match arrogance with noise. You can dismantle it with conviction and clarity. And so the question falls to us, when arrogance screams, will we answer with fear or with fearless clarity? And so we arrive back where it all began, the night Jasmine Crockett stunned Kash Patel on live television. A night when arrogance strutted onto the stage convinced of its own victory, only to be dismantled by unshakable clarity before a stunned audience. That moment wasn't just entertainment, it was an X-ray of power. It exposed what happens when bluster collides with truth, when showmanship collapses against substance. Patel believed swagger could carry him through. Crockett proved that dignity, service, and fearless intelligence will always stand taller when the lights burn brightest. But the story isn't frozen in that studio. Its resonance carries into every classroom, every workplace, every community where arrogance tries to shout others down. It's a reminder that noise may dominate headlines, but it never defines history. History pivots when someone chooses courage instead of fear, clarity instead of chaos, dignity instead of ego. That's why what we witnessed matters. It matters far beyond the clip, far beyond the trending hashtags. It matters because it calls to each of us to be a Crockett in our own lives, to hold the line when arrogance encroaches, to stand firm when provoked, to answer noise with fearless calm. If you felt the impact of her words, don't let it stop here. Share this story. Amplify it. Let it ripple beyond this screen, so that clarity continues to rise and arrogance crumbles under its own weight. Join this movement of voices demanding dignity over chaos, truth over performance. Because this wasn't just a clapback. It was a reminder that history is written by those bold enough to speak with courage,